to be kind of casual. I hope that's okay, Steve.
Absolutely.
A lot of the people who have been read along with us deeply appreciate the series, as of course we do,
Oh,
Steve.
great.
They all say basically thank you
Hmm.
for rating the series.
Well, thanks for reading. Without the reading, there's no series.
What's actually really exciting is like as the four of us are concluding our journey with the main series,
Hmm.
a bunch of people have started reading the series. And
Hmm.
so now I have the experience of like, oh, I can react and I can help them as
Hmm.
they're reading along. So
That's
it's
cool.
this is the best series for that too. Nothing else compares.
hello and welcome to the green team of the Legendarium. Today we have a very special guest, Steve.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for spending more time with us. You've been very generous, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
No problem. Always happy to talk to you about Malazan and anything else, really. I have with me today Hurinfan
Hi.
and Ash.
Hello.
Sadly, Yesna or Janice, he changed his name throughout the series, couldn't be with us today for other reasons, but I'm sure he would have loved to be here and have this final chat about the Book of the Fallen with you. So, with that, guys, we're here. We have concluded the main series, and we started this, what, January of 2021.
Wow.
It's been quite the journey
Mm.
individually, but also for the four of us as a group. Started off pretty much complete strangers, and now, we've celebrated like Huron's a dad, Ash is engaged, I recently got married, and it's just been really powerful to get to share all of this because we decided to start reading some books together.
Well, I guess that's sort of what books can do, right? Is they can draw people together, and especially now that it's much easier to talk with people on the other side of the planet. You can all gather around, your interest in particular books, and then create, your own dialogue and form friendships and lasting relationships. I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I remember the days of dial-up internet. Uh,
Me too.
it'd be very hard to have these conversations.
In UK, when it first started, when the internet first started, it was attached to the BT, the British Telecom, and you got charged by the minute to go
Oh my
online,
gosh.
as if it were a phone call.
How long did you live in the UK?
Um, let's see. I think 3 years the first time and 2 years the second.
Do you
So,
miss it much?
I miss the countryside. Especially as an ex-archaeologist, I love wandering that landscape. And you just sort of you get to see the extent to which the human presence has reshaped the environment all around us.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing there is as it should be. It's all changed, and that's really cool. Other aspects, well, not so much. I mean, it's a crowded place, and uh, there's a level of stress that's involved in living there, which can wear on you for sure.
Yeah, I guess the UK would be one of the prime examples, I guess, of humans changing the landscape over
Completely.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely.
Um,
Yeah, I remember walking. I know it sounds contradictory, but there's ridges of land that are called the Downs. I don't know why they're called the Downs, but they are. And they're traditional walkways, pathways. And I remember walking one in Surrey where the banks were to either side of the track were about 10 or 12 feet high. And basically, what that indicated is the foot traffic and droving of herds has actually worn the trail down by 12, 13 feet. So the ground level should have been up there, and we were walking down there, and that's like 6, 7, 8,000 years worth of
Jeez,
footfalls on that landscape. It's pretty cool.
that's
Wow.
wild. Yeah.
Around Tokyo used to be a swamp, and now it's most certainly not.
What was?
Tokyo, the
Oh, Tokyo, yes.
what was once known as Edo.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Winnipeg, where I grew up, was definitely a swamp, and in many ways it still is. So
I'm going to be going back to Winnipeg in December. It's not
in
quite the time
December.
for it, but
Wow. Glutton
yeah,
for punishment, are you?
it's where my it's where my future in-laws live.
Right.
It's
Okay.
where I was born as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not the time I would have picked, but it's honestly better than middle of the summer.
Yeah, I was there last summer and well, Southwest Ontario or Southwest Manitoba on a dig. And it was ferociously hot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you got to want to dig. Congratulations. I know you've been wanting to do that for a while.
Well, I mean, congratulations maybe on surviving it. Um, I
Not bad.
won't go any further than that, but uh, it just reminded me that excavation, especially in a square meter unit, is for the young. It's not for the old.
That makes sense. This time reading through the series, I gotta say, I obviously I loved it, but the pace that we were going, and the activities we were doing around the books really contributed to the feeling of walking in a desert.
Good,
At the end,
I
I
think.
really felt like Tavor Paran just kind of collapsing into someone's arms, like it's over. We're finally done.
Yeah, that was sort of the intent. I mean, how does one convey, a journey across a wasteland?
Mhm.
Um, and do you actually want to have the reader feel like they've actually journeyed across a wasteland for months on end? Um, and I thought about it for a long time, but I thought that's the only way to have those final scenes deliver the emotional impact I wanted, is that the reader, in a sense, had to be as exhausted as the soldiers on the battlefield.
Several times during the series, it felt like the regulars were kind of the mirror of the readers. Was that an intentional thing, or is
Yeah,
this me? Okay,
yeah,
excellent.
absolutely. Yeah, um, yeah, they're the silent, unseen witnesses to the entire story. So when Tabor gives her speech to the regulars, that is, in a sense, a stand-in for the author giving a speech to the readers.
We noted that in our episode.
Did you? That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think actually like this just feels really meta. Like Steve is saying congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a long series. If you've come that far, I think it behooves the author to acknowledge that in some way.
It felt in the last two books, especially Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God, that you as an author were addressing the reader more and more.
Yeah.
Um, Most prominently for me through the character of Badal.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
she actually has a short speech. I'm curious how this reflects your current attitude towards the power of words.
Right.
Words. I have nothing but words. I cast away many of them, only to have others find me. What can words achieve here in this hard, real place? But doubts themselves are nothing but words, a troubled song in my head. When I speak, the snakes listen. Their eyes are wide. But what happens to all I say once the words slip into them? Alchemies. Sometimes the mixture froths and bubbles. Sometimes it boils. Sometimes nothing stirs and the potion lies dead, cold and gray as mud. Who can know? Who can predict? I have words and nothing else. And in these words I have no faith. They cannot topple walls. They cannot crush mountains down to dust. The faces swam past her. She knew them all, and they were nothing but blurs, each one smeared inside tears. But what else is there? What else can I use against them? They are quitters. They claim power in their voice. The islands in her mind were drowning.
Mm. Yeah. I think every author or writer, at some point you sort of face that dark afternoon of the soul kind of thing where you're wondering what's the point of it all. That all you've got are words. For whatever reason, that's where your talents directed you. That's where your obsessions directed you. And yet you don't know, how words are received by others. So you send them out, and you hope for the best. And so there's always going to be times when you're left, I don't know about despondent, but almost exhausted by the question of whether there's efficacy to language, to words. And the more we see around us, we can also see the abuse of language, and that does have an effect. So that tends to be more obvious. But I think that the positive sides of things related to words are probably generally more subtle. We don't notice them. We don't signpost them, but they're there. And how language evolves, I think, is a reflection of that. Um, it's interesting to see and sort of be witness to this whole blurring of gender, for example, and language at that point it becomes the center point, if you will, of identity, and so it's an example of where people are engaged in almost a conflict of language, of words, of terminology, um, which is all pointing towards individual senses of identity. And that's an example where there is a subtle evolution that is occurring in our language, and it's long overdue, and it's now in place, but there will be resistance to it. There will always be resistance to it. So, I look at that, the real world examples, and you can find the positives, amidst the torrent of the negatives.
Yes, this time I was struck much more by the Four Cruel Assail embodying the harmful power of language.
Yeah,
I guess having them be the ultimate villains makes a lot of sense given what you were trying to do with the series.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They couldn't have been, in a sense, it couldn't have been just a physical um, manifestation of power with bad intention, right? That's
Mhm.
kind of the cliched Dark Lord trope of fantasy, and but there's a lot, like you say. I mean, with the snake, language becomes front and center, and so and Badal is caught in this vortex of uncertainty, which she rails against, but at the same time, it's her greatest virtue. And so, what opposes that is the Fork or the Sail, who are bringing certainty, the absence of nuance into sort of the social mix. And so, that struck me as that's the ideal enemy, if you will, the ideal dark lord.
It's very
Um,
insightful.
yeah, Badal being, in my opinion, the best poet in the series. I think she kicks Fisher's ass in the linguistic sense here.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. You move into that, when I move into that character, yeah, it's like shifting into a kind of a surreal lyrical mindset, and it's where the metaphor and symbols are front and center. They're not submerged, and so that's the language that she speaks in, and that was interesting to write, but it was also very liberating once I moved into that point of view.
Makes sense.
Well, speaking of artists, you write a lot of artists, whether it be Brash Lester or Mulligan or Badal or Fisher, Cataspaw. Out of is there any single artist that you feel is most like yourself, or that you're putting yourself more into, or is it just like little bits here and there? You're like,
You mean any artists among the characters I've created, or
yes,
among real artists?
among the characters you've created.
Um, no, I think they're all aspects. I'm married to a visual artist. I began as a visual artist, so there's a whole industry surrounding that stuff that similar to the film industry, the studio industry, that actually you'd swear sometimes that it views its very own product, i.e., that produced by artists, with immeasurable contempt. And so, with characters like Omer Logan and the critic that sits alongside him, the Toad,
Gumble.
I was able to have a lot of fun. And of course, then you go to something like Brash Fluster, and that was just having a lot more fun. But that's not part of the main series, so.
Um, I feel more than most other characters. When I'm reading your artist characters, I feel like like with Vidal when he said earlier, you're more directly speaking your own views. If correct me if I'm wrong, but like in Carcanos, for example, when Kadaspala harkens upon the dead child,
Mhm.
he says, I'll paint his face 1,000 times, and people will rail at me for showing them the truth, or
Mhm.
in Crackpot Trail, you're railing against criticism and hard criticism, I feel. And then or Mulligan and Gumble, you're having a little fun back and forth with the critics, etc. Am I on point, or am I
Um,
just completely off mark?
no, I guess there's always a sense of, if they're going to talk about art, let's engage in that from a particular stance, a particular point of view. So Ormy Logan is uh, an artist devoted to the recording of history. So he's in place of the cameraman, right? He's pre-tech in that respect. So, and I've been to enough museums, and I've spent a lot of time in art galleries as well, but in rooms where, especially military campaigns, um, are painted in great detail. These huge paintings, things like Charge of the Light Brigade or Waterloo and this kind of stuff. And that's kind of Ormy Logan's profession, if you will, is that he is there to record for posterity these events. But of course, you look back at some of that early historical expression of art, and you may be looking at the Roman era, where statuary and mosaics and all the rest that were not necessarily religiously oriented, but were political, and so they were propagandistic. So there's that uh, pull and prod kind of thing that's going on with the historical artist, and Ormer Logan plays that up to the extreme. So you've got people with the opinions that the work Ormy Logan is producing is not representative of the reality of those particular events. He might argue otherwise. I made a point of you never see anything I never describe anything that he's painted, so it's entirely up to the reader whether this stuff is in any way accurate. And ultimately, does it even matter, right? Because once the moment's passed, it's lost to the sensibilities of the living. So that kind of stuff is just it's fun for me to play with. And do my views kind of peek through every now and then? I think if I think of Carcanus and Kataspala and that his initial presentation of thesis that he does when he comes upon the bodies in the forest, there's a lot there that I kind of recognize, and I think most artists would recognize that. On the one hand, you've got people out, say here in Vancouver Island, who are standing in front of thousand-year-old trees, trying to stop those trees from being killed. And as an artist, I can write about this stuff. I can write about the heartbreak of that and the tragedy of that. But I'm not standing on the picket line. So is what I'm doing of any worth whatsoever? And that becomes a question that I think ends up haunting those artists who are interested in engaging in the harsh realities of the real world and pushing that through the filter of fiction. I think we all face that kind of questioning of whether we're wasting our time.
The way I see it is like each person, you have your own different skill sets, and people also receive information and process information differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so I struggle with this too because like I think about my day job and it's like there are so many bigger problems in the world. And I'm worried about like this deadline or
Mm-hmm.
this one particular customer, but in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter? And should I be putting my energy towards something more meaningful? And I feel like, especially the millennial generation, it's something that we in particular like really grapple with. Like
Mm-hmm.
we are really looking for jobs where we feel like it is meaningful. And sometimes I just have to remind myself that even, especially on an individual level, like you can make a difference, even if you're just speaking to one person.
Yep.
And so, even if all you have is words, like if that one person, that's the way that they receive and process information, and that's the way they receive care, that does make a difference.
Yeah, I think I kind of stumbled on that in Dead House Gates when I got towards the end when of that novel, when I was writing and realized that the tragedy that was being presented was so overwhelming. in scale, that how was I going to, in terms of sort of reawakening a sense of humanity or hope, how was I going to answer that? And my conclusion was, there's only one way to answer this stuff, and that is with I guess, the smallest, most human of gestures. So the things that you are capable of doing is your answer to that, no matter how vast the macroscape of the tragedy happens to be. And so in that book, it was embodied by Mappo healing two dogs.
Yeah.
And that was his answer. And that was, in a sense, the thematic answer to everything that had preceded that. So he did what he could. And I think that needs to be, well, how could it not be applied to everyone out there, right? All of you, all of us. We do what we can.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's got to be good enough.
And I think that actually makes a good to contrast that in Dead House Gates, you have the whole Fellison storyline where people aren't quite doing what they can. They're not reaching out, they're not empathizing. And then of course that leads to so much pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a metaphysical question about the world of Malazan.
Sure.
I suspect your answer will be that's up for the reader to decide for themselves. But as we know in Malazan, it's a world where ideas fundamentally shape reality. Your perception of things changes the things themselves. And of course, Byrne's dream is where most things are taking place.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, if there is some kind of bedrock to the reality here, if in the end, is it just a dream in the mind of God, or is it, is there like a physical, materialistic reality at the heart of it, at which things are stemming from?
You're asking if I think our universe is exclusively mechanistic versus something else?
Not our universe, the world of Malazan.
The Malazan universe. Okay. To answer the Malazan one is to answer the other one, right? There's really no. I can't see how you can. I mean, the Malazan stuff, at least for me, and I've mentioned this many times, but the notion of taking a metaphor and making it real, and so it explored that in great depth, in as many iterations as I could think of. But the fundamental questions are the same questions that we all face. And you're right, they're metaphysical questions. And so if you think of how the Malazan world is manifested, you've got a hierarchy of presence, if you will. And at one level, you've got the mortal human level, and then you've got higher levels of existence, some of which apparently almost disregard space and time. So there's that notion of immortality is present throughout. And even those characters who are human who then die, it doesn't end for them. Something proceeds beyond that. So in any kind of work of fiction, if you're writing about the human condition, you are tackling these issues, and it doesn't matter if it's set on another planet. It doesn't matter if it involves a whole bunch of rabbits and whatever, right? You're still grappling with questions of the human condition, but not just on an individual level, but what's the relationship of humanity and consciousness with the rest of reality? And so, I keep up my readings. It was never a sense for me that once I finished university courses that I would stop learning. I've continued to this day. And what I found, and don't forget that this series is now, I finished it, 20 years ago, something like that. So time moves on, and what I read and what I learn has moved on from that point. But if I were to look back on it, I'd say that, yeah, I was dealing with some fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness. And what the Malazan world was indicating was the physical breakdown of the human body is not the end point for consciousness. And so that is being explored throughout the fantasy novel. Curiously, I think most fantasy novels actually explore that idea. Um, I think even you look at Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and you've got resurrection of some form or another. You've got spirits, you've got ghosts, you've got um, elements of the past that return uh, at the right moments. So it's always been built into the fantasy genre, and that's, I mean, if you're thinking in terms of the modern definition of the fantasy genre. Um, it's all there, and I think it's all there because of the pre-modern notion of fantasy, which might be mythology and that whole area, folklore and all the rest. Throughout all of that stuff, there's a sense of another world behind the world we see, and so the Malazan series certainly is following in those well-worn tracks. That there is something beyond that, beyond what we see. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
I think it's exactly the kind of answer I was expecting.
is that a
Um,
good thing or not?
I'll have to think about it.
Mm.
I will say I did something I completely missed the first time around, but I quite actually appreciated this time was Setchel Lath arguing for existence at the center of reality. That was I think that was a really interesting thing.
Remind me, such a laugh.
Knuckles.
Right. Okay.
He and Killimandy and the Errant were, yeah, it's basically the center of existence, yeah. And they're like, we're going to destroy everything. And he's like, no, don't. Like, existence is good.
Is this in the Carcanis?
This is in Dust of Dreams.
In Death and Dream?
Yeah.
Okay.
He recalls a time back when he journeyed to the fundamental root of reality and he argued for existence, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a fun recollection.
It's okay. We've read it more recently than you have.
You
Yeah.
certainly have. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never reread the series, so
It occurs to me, yeah, we just have Steve, you, a guy who claims to have once known the author on this to chat about the series. But like, what right do you have to say anything about any of this, right? It's a completely
absolutely,
different guy, as you
absolutely.
said.
I'm not the person I once was, nor was I from book to book throughout that series. Different person wrote each one. So, and that's just an ongoing thing that you end up having to live with.
I am very curious because, like, as a reader, a lot of readers going through the ten books, like when they started versus when they finished,
Hmm.
they're also not the same person.
No, they're not.
What, if you can remember, what was like the biggest change you noticed from between beginning and end after you finished writing?
Um, on a personal level, I moved from atheist to agnostic. Um, but also, in a sense, I moved away from what would be the cliche notion of as one gets older, one gets more conservative.
Mhm.
I moved in the opposite direction. And I remember in my younger years having the conviction that, one cannot hold two contradictory notions in their head. Right? One has to eliminate the other. Now, and by the time I finished the series, I was perfectly comfortable with inherent contradictions in my belief systems. It doesn't bother me in the least. Uh, and so I guess part of that journey was also being more forgiving of myself. That when I'd finished the series, I could honestly say it was the best I could do, and I had to be content with that. There's no going back and revising anything. There's no changing anything. It is what it is, and the immediate response was relief that I'd actually got it done. But once it goes out into the world, it's completely out of your hands what happens next. And I just had to be content with that. So I think, yeah, I think I got a lot more relaxed, if you will. I mean, the burden of writing the 10 books and getting it done was something I wasn't aware of at the time, but I really emptied my tank in the time that I allotted myself for the series. And that has to me, that has to be good enough. I couldn't do any more than that. So
That kind of resonates with Tavor's journey
Oh
throughout
yes,
the books.
absolutely. Oh yeah, a lot of these characters took that same journey with me. Yeah.
Yeah. I am curious. So, the first book was published in 1999. Crippled God came out in 2011. And in like more recent years, there's been a lot more, at least from my observation, a lot more discussion and more accessible
Yeah.
discussion
Yeah.
about the series. Have you noticed any differences or trends in the conversations you're having with your readers?
Hmm. I think so. I think it's. I don't know if this is going to come out the wrong way. It feels more thoughtful these days. That there something about this series is sinking deep roots into readers and sort of stirring some of those fundamental questions, I guess. Um, Mind you, when I get asked to do an interview, I tend to pull it in that direction. So it may all be my fault. Things have changed. I'm not sure. I mean, I have an abiding fascination with language, but also with those aspects of the human condition that um, kind of present the garden that I walk into when as a writer. Um, that's all the hanging fruit. So I guess I'm sort of now proceeding a bit more measured, a bit more careful in a lot of what I'm doing, and that could just be it could be creative exhaustion. Who knows?
Hmm.
But I'm scraping the barrel at the moment, but to be expected, I guess.
How do you rejuvenate?
Um, the dig I went on to this summer really rejuvenated me, got me
Nice.
back out into the real world. Writing is such an isolating activity. If you're not co-writing something, you are doing this entirely on your own, and so you got to carry that with you. And sort of things like having conversations with readers of the books, um, even though the books are 20 years old or whatever or older, um, that has this capacity to sort of refuel me to a certain extent. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that um, people are continuing to read the series and then wanting to engage with me, online, whatever. I'm very, very appreciative of that because it gives me a boost for sure.
Do you find it difficult because, your readers are all at different points in the series and, all the other novels? Is it is it kind of challenging with the context switching of like, okay, what are we talking about now?
Yeah, it's challenging, but that's my flaw, not anyone else's, right? Um, if I don't remember things from book two or book three in the series, that's down to me. It's not down to the readers. So I'm not. Um, I do my best, and I do make a point of if I don't remember a particular scene or even a character, I'll ask the readers, for whom it's much fresher, and they can remind me. So.
Regarding the change in the fandom, there's something I think my favorite part about the changes, I think people have generally gotten kinder. There was at one point in when I started the series, there was uh sometimes subtle, sometimes not kind
Hmm.
of streak of snobbery,
Hmm.
let's say, with some of the readers who, and to some extent this still exists, who view the series as kind of like this it's so complicated and I'm so smart for being able to understand it and whatever else.
Some
And
say inscrutable.
Hmm.
yeah, and if people don't like the series for whatever reason or can't connect with it, it must just be because they aren't good readers or whatever else. But now I find there are a lot more readers who are willing to engage with the series and like it, and maybe not love it, but engage with it where they are at, and it's kind of everyone seems more welcoming to everyone else, and even people who don't like the series. Do you have any comments about that, or?
Um, I would suspect that may be occurring regardless of who the author and who the books are, who the author is and who the books are. I think it may be that the whole sort of booktube phenomenon is maturing. Um, that it had its original outburst, if you will. Um, and there were factors kicking in on that uh, where the negative stance got a lot more views than the positive stance. That's probably starting to balance out now. I think people are tired of negativity.
Mm.
We get enough of it in the world. Why would you voluntarily go on to BookTube to get a whole bunch more? So it may be that the whole phenomenon is evolving, and it's balancing itself, becoming much more reasonable in its engagement. I mean, there'll always be outliers.
Mhm.
That's because the economics drive that. I don't think it's necessarily down to um, any anything in the individual, but it's the actual economics of acquiring as large an audience as possible. And I think initially, yeah, those would be feeding on sort of the negative the negative streams, the darker waters. But I think we all get tired of it. I think it just starts running its course. I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, and these days it's almost an instantaneous understanding when you read the clickbait title of something, whether you're going to go and look at it or not, right? And so, in a sense, they're attempting to, via the clickbait, some ridiculous, outlandish phrase or whatever. I think the big one these days I'm seeing a lot of is they're lying to you. And then it goes on to whatever the statement is, whether it's history, archaeology, evolution of humanity. It's all they're lying to you. That's where the front line is. And I just can't be bothered anymore because it's an absurd statement. I mean, who's they? Who's standing in front of you lying to you? Nobody's. I mean, it's ridiculous. But so that stuff still pervades online. But the stuff I'll listen to, the stuff I'll watch, is the stuff that's identifies itself in a balanced and intriguing way. So that I don't know if I'm in any way an outlier in that. I think that's probably the sensibility that's sort of seeping into everyone these days.
I think from like a technological point of view, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, these companies have kind of been forced to give their consumers more balanced content as well, as opposed to, I mean, there is that, algorithm where it's like, hey, we notice you really like this stuff, so we're just going to continue to give you the same kind of stuff. But now there's more variety. It's not as much of an echo chamber as it was like maybe, 2, 3 years ago. There are, real world factors that played into why they had to make these changes.
Mhm.
Um, but I do see that balance of trying to present more than just that one perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a great example is the purchasing of Twitter, and the invitation to unbridled toxicity, and it just drove everybody away. I mean, it
Yeah.
completely backfired. Um, so that's quite interesting. Yeah, and it may just be that it's like any other um, new media that engages, a massive population. It evolves, it matures. We get used to it, and then we start getting more discriminating as we get used to it.
Yeah. I
Because
I am Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No, I'm really interested to sort of catch all your take on that because you're definitely a different generation from me. So.
Actually, that's a great segue. Speaking of different generation, so I'm of the millennial generation and also a little bit on the older side of millennial. When I now see, content created by Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and I'm like, what are these words you are saying? Like, I remember when, I was a teen and I wasn't like the most, connected and like, know all the lingo and all the slang that was going on. I was quite a bit behind, but I could still pick up on things, especially when instant messaging really took off. But now, like the slang has evolved so much faster. And I feel that I am falling behind right? And it's only been like maybe 5 years. And, especially with the boom of TikTok and things like that. I don't mean this to come off the wrong way, but like for you, how have you thought or have you given thought of like, okay, how would I market my work to these newer generation? What kind of do you have to change the way that you talk about the themes? Like what kind of marketing changes would you need?
I have no idea. I've been left so far behind on this stuff. There's so little that I would have time to do in that kind of marketing. It's a full-time job. That's why, people hire people to do this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm old-fashioned in the sense that it's a combination
You
of old,
post everything on Facebook.
yeah, and lazy. Extremely lazy for this stuff. I have a very finite amount of time left, and on a daily basis. So if I'm going to put, any kind of creative energy, into something, it had better be the novel that I'm working on, because all that other stuff, it will eat me alive. I'm not built for it, so the work's just gonna have to stand on its own.
I guess as the resident Gen Z here, one of the things that appeals to Malazan about me, I would say in my generation there is an overbearing sense of doom that people are just kind of growing up with.
Mm-hmm. Hence Grimdark. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and also hence Grimdark, the loss of faith in other people and their authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. And loss of faith in authority.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Basically, any structure is regarded with high amounts of suspicion.
Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah. I'd say that's fair.
Yeah, and I think that Melasma is actually really important for me to inform those perspectives because it does deal with the big questions that kind of are all pervasive and features a lot of uh, disillusioned characters, let's say, and characters
Mm-hmm.
losing their faith
Yeah.
and sometimes regaining it. So I think there is a strong thread there that can still connect with the extremely disillusioned, cynical, often nihilistic people of my generation. Certainly did with me.
All right. Well, that's interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and as well the ideas that reality being malleable, I think, is something uh, a lot of people my age would agree with.
Yeah, and
Anti-realists.
finding hope in this sea of despair,
Hmm.
which ultimately comes down to, the person across from you. It comes down to a human level every single time, right? It's your neighbor, it's the person on the street you pass. It's those gestures that are unexpected, that rekindle that beaten down belief in humanity, and it's going to come at that small scale, because the big stuff is going to appear to at least resist because it has its own momentum. The world has its momentum. Our civilization has a momentum that all of us feel. And I don't care if you're a multi-billionaire. All of us feel that it is beyond our ability to slow it down or to control it. It is pelting headlong to something, and that's the time when I think each of us has to sort of reach out and take the hand of the person next to you, because nothing else is reliable anymore. This has gotten pretty heavy, hasn't it?
This is where I live, man. I I got to shout out my boy Udenas and Silchus Ruin and Troll from Midnight Tides for just kind of encapsulating all of this pretty much perfectly, I think.
Well, Udenas especially, yeah,
Yeah.
he's doing meta commentary all the way through,
Mhm.
and exploring the idea of what it is to do the heroic act, and how much of that is manufactured and how much of that is genuine. I mean, that's what Udenas is all about. I had great
Yeah.
fun writing him as a character.
I will always be an apologist for him. I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes a lot when he starts complaining, but
Well, yeah, but
he's got right too.
yeah, he asked the hard questions for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He reminds me of the poem "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night." He is the grim man who sees with blinding sight.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
Karen, did you have something?
To shift gears completely. Earlier you said I got two questions. You said that unless you're co-writing, it's just very isolating. Have you ever considered writing something with Ian?
Yeah. We started a novella set in during the Mott Forest campaign.
Oh
Ooh.
yeah.
And so I took a whole series of characters, mostly the bull, Mott irregulars, and Cam had a whole bunch of other characters. But it it started pulling in two different directions in the sense that the absurdity of the Mott characters of the bulls was just too absurd, if you will. And Cam just said, I can't deal with these guys, even in fiction. Um, so I think we stopped at about closing in on halfway of the story.
Mhm.
And actually, I just found it on an old junk drive, so I pulled it onto my desktop, and I'll take another look at it because
Ooh.
I could probably just follow the Mott story by itself. And if I do, I'll pop it up on Facebook, and people can have fun with that.
Ooh.
So
I think you've made a lot of readers very happy with that.
We actually mentioned this, I think, in our series. We want a book set in Mott. I think, yeah,
well,
maybe.
Cam and I wrote a feature film script called Black Dog Blues, which is the whole Black Dog campaign. Well, not the whole campaign, but set in that campaign. That was our third or fourth script.
Oh,
And I know
wow.
Cam has it sitting around somewhere. It involved Whiskey Jack and his squad. It involved Onus Tulan Tool. And I think the storyline was surrounding a Jagoot hiding out in a tower in the swamp. And when Tool finds out about that,
Ooh.
that sort of triggers uh, his maniacal hunt, and the squad is basically trying to a survive the encounter and b actually save the Jagoot
Oh, wow.
without Tool knowing about it. So it was a fun story. It's quite comedic in a lot of ways. And so yeah, that's been sitting around for decades.
I I imagine the Teist Andy and the contrasted against the Bull brothers makes for
Yeah, I don't think I had
quite a.
for the novella that Cam and I worked on. I don't think we had
Hmm.
the Taisanding show up at all.
Okay.
Um, I did have Stump Fit. Stump Fit is the salamander god in the Black
Yes.
Dog Forest.
Shows up in
Oh,
Bone
from Bone
Hunters.
Hunters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I actually had a question of, do you have any Malazan short stories that haven't made it into a published book? So you did answer that.
Yeah, it's not complete, but yeah.
I mean, any chance that you will actually let that out into the world?
I think the Stump Fit one. I think the title, if I recall right, it's the Collected Tales of Stump Fit, and of course it's a pun because one of the things that the salamander god does is he mocks his believers and gets them to grab his tail, and then the tail comes off in their hands. So, and then he
So
laughs.
silly.
Yeah, very silly.
My second question was, you were talking earlier about rejuvenation and how nice it is to talk to people at work. I'd say probably, I'm guessing at least 90% of the time you talk about Book of the Fallen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so hypothetically, if you were to talk about some of your other works, say like Carcass, do you think that might be a little bit more helpful for your mental health instead of just talking about Book of the Fallen all the time? Hypothetically,
You're perceiving issues with my mental health, are you? Yeah, fair enough.
not mental health, but
Um, no, I mean it's just the way it is. That's the most popular series or most
yeah.
popular books I've written. So that's what's going to be talked about the most. And the Carcanis one, well, it's not yet done. So I'm fully sympathetic to readers holding off on that series before they engage in it. That makes perfect sense. And I don't think there's an automatic correlation there's no guaranteed drawing across from fantasy readers into science fiction. I know when I grew up, it was both. I grew up reading both, but I think the divide has sharpened a little bit. So you get
Mm.
a lot of fantasy readers who are not interested in science fiction, and readers of science fiction who are not interested in fantasy. So I think that divide has grown sharper. And So I'm not in that respect. I'm not surprised that there is far less attention, say, on the Willful Child trilogy or the First Contact novel. It would be
I
nice.
think Huron was in a roundabout way trying to convince you to come on to a discussion about those books.
Oh, happy to, happy to. Yeah, yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
I want to cover Willful Child sometime. I love Star Trek now.
You see, that's just it. It was so much dependent upon an audience base that was very familiar with the original series and the films.
I read
Mm.
it before I watched any Star Trek,
Me
and
too.
I still enjoyed it, but I knew that a lot of it was going over my head. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, it's funny regardless of knowing the context, but I'm sure the context would help a lot. I want to reread it now that I've seen 90% of Trek.
yeah.
I want to go back to your essays. So
Hmm.
you have quite a few all on Facebook. Any intention of curating a collection?
Yeah. That's ongoing right now because
Okay.
I'm writing a book on writing, and it's split up into three parts. And the middle part is a collection of as many of those essays as possible without falling into repetition
Mm.
in terms of content. So AP Kahneman's my editor for that. So he's
Oh,
going
nice.
through essays. Yeah.
I gotta say it's a great time to be an Erikson fan because like the three big projects. Okay, the three big projects that I know about, the Next Witness book, Walk into Shadows, and this writing book, are all extremely interesting to me, and I
Oh,
cannot
cool.
wait for them to come out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
I want to pivot a little bit, going back to like art. And in the past, we've talked about adaptations. I want to take a different spin on it.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that I really enjoy, especially when I was reading Book of the Fallen, was listening to music as I was reading
Hmm.
and trying to match, the tone of the music to what was going on in the books. I want to pitch a concept to you.
Sure.
So I've seen this done with like movies, with video games, where it's more of a conceptual concert. And it would be, I think it would be really cool to take specific scenes from the Malazan world, whether it's like, for example, Beak's sacrifice, or like the Siege of Pale, or, something comedic, really funny and have that set to music with like visual representation of those story points, going on whether that is going to be live action or animated or, all sorts of different kinds of ways.
Mm.
And I know I haven't like really delved into this side of Malazan. I know there are fans who have gone and created music
Hmm.
inspired by Malazan and these different scenes. I just want to pitch an idea of like maybe a conceptual concert could be a next evolution.
That's very cool. I hadn't even thought about that. But you're right, there's a lot of music out there that seems to be inspired by the Malazan stuff. Most of it seems to be fairly metal, as far as I can tell.
Which is very interesting
Yep.
to me
Isn't it?
because that's not
Yeah.
my genre of preference.
No, not mine either. There's a lot of it out there. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you'd be able to pull that off. There's also a lot of artwork that's
Hmm.
inspired by this. So that portfolio I think is really expanded a lot, and some very good artists are engaged in this stuff. So yeah, you could do you could certainly, if you're just using still images, there's probably enough now that you could put together something for at least a short piece. Um,
Yeah, that would be a
so-
cool community project
Hmm.
to do like a proof of concept. Yeah.
We actually had a question regarding music. Steve, what kind of music do you like? What do you listen to?
What's on your playlist?
Yeah.
What's on my playlist? I don't have my phone nearby. For a long time, I wrote to music, and curiously, with a couple of exceptions, no instrumentals, because I'd end up sitting there staring off into out through the window of the cafe or the bar, listening to the instrumental. But so I was going for stuff with lyrics, and my only rule was they had to be really good lyrics, um, very evocative lyrics. So, it was definitely hunting for the best songwriters out there and performers and stuff. The one exception, I'm pretty sure this is true. Somebody's probably going to track down the dates and find out I'm completely wrong, but I seem to recall writing the whole final sequence of the Deadhouse Gates from the city wall, viewing outwards, drawn from the soundtrack of Black Hawk Down. And one song in particular. I'm trying to remember the name of the song. It's an instrumental. It's the one that's Leave No Man Behind. And I have a sense, maybe it came afterwards, but I put that piece of music to what I saw as the nonverbal sequence involving the two young warlocks, Nil and Nether, and the witnessing of Coltane's demise. And if I were ever to film that, I would drop all sound off and just have the music. And so we'd be able to see her. I think it's Nether screaming, but you wouldn't hear it. It would just be the music. And I don't recall if I actually wrote it that way, but I do know that I've since applied that piece of music to those final scenes. But otherwise, it would be a huge variety. So not related to what I was listening to while writing, but just in a general sense, yeah, it's a pretty broad range. Everything from Sinatra and swing all the way up to actually there is a stop point, isn't there? I don't listen to a lot of the new stuff at all.
So no Taylor Swift for you.
No, but I don't have any issues with Taylor Swift at all. But it's not the stuff that grabs me.
No
So
screamo.
no, I'll go back to, I'll listen to Dylan. I'll listen to our Canadian version, Bruce Cockburn. I've been to every concert that's come by through Victoria over the last 7-8 years. Getting every chance I can to see him because he's getting on now. And yeah, so certainly the 70s and 80s rock music definitely is something I still listen to. Anything else? Stuff like that.
I think for me, if I could see Celine Dion in concert,
Oh yeah?
but yeah, and unfortunately, due to her health, she's had to cancel tours and stuff, and we don't know like if she'll ever be able to resume.
Yeah.
But that's like one of those things that's like she's such an icon.
Mm.
I would love to be able to live that.
Yeah, I still put, late at night, if I'm not tired, I put the lights out after my wife's gone to bed and put the headphones on and listen to Dark Side of the Moon, lots of Pink Floyd, because it's still breathtaking. And the lyrics are phenomenal. Whatever you say about Roger Waters and his present politics, that guy could write lyrics. Some phrases actually show up in some of my novels. There's a phrase used in Amused to Death, Roger Waters. I think it's something along the line of hyenas coming down a hillside in one of his songs. And that was so evocative that I actually stuck it in there somewhere in Deadhouse Gates, I think.
Everybody's going to be frantically searching Search of the Fallen.
It's in there somewhere. I don't know if I mentioned hyenas, but I think I might have just drawn the whole line out. The thing is, great lyrics are inspiring. At least they should be for a writer. They should be inspiring.
Well, the thing with music is that it's for a lot of people that's just like an easier path to emotion,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So you're priming them, and then you hear the lyrics, and then that's even more powerful.
Yeah. I'm very envious of musicians because it's a shared thing, right? Your art, the whole job is to share your art with an audience, preferably a live audience. And everybody sort of then becomes part of that entire experience, the entire performance. It's something writers don't get to do.
With your liking of like good lyrics, do you listen to much rap?
No. I've heard of years ago now, this is going to date me. I heard a few of the Eminem songs. The writing was very, very good. It was excellent. But no, I generally don't. I don't know, when I hear it in passing, I hear a lot of anger in it. I hear a lot of misogyny.
Yeah.
So I steer away. I'm sure there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, but that's just
There are, but a lot of the popular stuff is like that,
yeah.
Yeah.
and also a lot of the really angry stuff is just coming from
Oh,
a
righteous
good
anger.
place, I
I
think.
mean, it's
Yeah.
very real anger. Yeah, absolutely. I don't blame them, but it's not something I want to listen to put my mind at ease.
Mm.
I kind of want to talk about some um, in Malazan.
Hmm.
And this is so Fiddler. Fiddler is the one that I am most attached to of all the characters. And his relationship with Hedge is
Hmm.
something that I was not quite expecting, especially like at the end of
Hmm.
how he was
That's it.
treating Hedge, and then Hedge is just like not understanding why.
Yeah, yeah.
How much of Fiddler is you, and like is that relationship between Fiddler and Hedge kind of like you processing the deaths of these characters that you've created and
Huh.
got
Wow,
attached
I
to?
hadn't thought of that. If I was, it was subconsciously processing that. For me, it was more Hedge had already done, or Fiddler had done his grieving.
Yeah.
And to have that and almost stripped of its value with
Mm,
Hedge's return was a very difficult thing for him to deal with. And so I wanted to really portray that. I knew I had a final scene of him with respect to that theme behind a tent, just breaking down in tears.
yeah.
But Fiddler is very much sort of the every person for the series. So yeah, he's got nothing power wise that's going to overwhelm anyone else. But he's a survivor, and that was kind of the point.
I did get to a point in reading about his like him processing like I already went through all this pain and
Hmm.
now you're back.
Hmm.
And the conversation about like Fiddler is basically the last bridge burner left, even though technically he wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, and just putting myself in his shoes where everybody that he cared about like has left him, and he feels so alone, and he's
You
like
mean Hedge or Fiddler?
Fiddler
Fiddler. Yeah.
feeling that yeah, Fiddler being the last bridge burner,
Hmm.
feeling that I can't I can't really let myself get attached to Hedge again
Hmm.
because he's gonna leave me again. And so then at
Hmm.
that end, that scene where Hedge says, "I'm not ready to go yet," and he stays, and that relief, I guess,
Hmm.
from Fiddler, that
Hmm.
was very touching. That was one of those moments I was like, yes, thank you for doing this right.
Good. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the flip side, is it time for me to bring up Sin?
You can bring up Sin.
Hit it.
Excellent.
Sin. Yeah, you guys had issues with Sin, did you?
It's me specifically.
Right.
I think I might be like one of the only people in the entire fandom that
I
really
mean, you talked us
I
around, yeah.
I radicalized them, maybe. Um, so
Very tragic.
yes, on this read through, I was paying special attention to this character because this is a character that really I'm drawn towards for whatever reason. I'll give you my how I perceive what's happening with Sin
Okay.
and my problems, or
Yeah. Yeah.
with how it ends.
Hmm.
We have Sin. We have this damaged character,
Very.
Perry. Yeah. From books 4 to 7, her journey makes a lot of sense to me, and I should say her personal psychological development makes sense to me throughout. The point to where I have trouble comes in where the bone hunters seem to collectively deny her humanity, and this despite everything that she saves them multiple times. Probably
Hmm.
she's saves them more than any other individual in the army. Maybe like Tavor or
Hmm.
Quick Ben can
Hmm.
can say more. So at the end of her arc, she decides she's going to seize the power of the crippled god.
Hmm.
She kind of coincidentally saves the day again.
Hmm.
Stormy and Gessler follow after her, and without trying to reach out, without trying to reach inside to find the child that's there that's hurting, they just kind of kill her. And this wouldn't feel out of place to me in Dust of Dreams or some of the previous books.
Hmm.
But in a book like The Crippled God, where so much is hinging on looking across the gap and
Mhm.
finding a suffering person and maybe even making the wildly illogical decision to try and save them, despite the fact that it might not be the correct thing to do.
Mhm.
Um, you have Stormy is just okay. Like his last thoughts basically are she's not human. When it strikes me that she very much is throughout her journey, like despite the fact that maybe the fire elemental and you got to her and she had all this inner turmoil. Her throughout her struggle, whenever we get a point of view, she feels like a human character to me,
Mhm.
and that's exemplified by her last statements. So to me, the way that she goes out, it very much feels like the Bone Hunters failed her.
They may well have. They may well have. I mean, not not everyone succeeds at everything. Um, there have to be there have to be failures. But at the same time, the extent of damage to Sin certainly was sufficient to have everybody sort of go, "Whoa, let's step
Mhm.
back a little bit on this one." At which point, uh, other events, other circumstances occur that those other characters need to end up placing their focus elsewhere. And so she does, in a sense, drop off the emotional radar for many characters.
Mhm.
And certainly what Stormy's going through at the end there, to me, it was consistent with his mindset. And that's about, the best I could do for that one. I didn't entirely want to make the sense of this is an irredeemable character, but rather that the people around that character were not up to the task of
Mm,
redeeming that character. Grub came the closest.
Mm.
yeah. I think that's the part that was like I had to pause for a little bit because Grub was anticipating something big to come from Sin,
Mm-hmm.
and he could have said, "No, I'm gonna stick by her side," but he didn't. He did, in fact, turn away, and that was like, "Oh, but why?
Mm,
You were the closest to her."
the closest, yeah. Yeah.
Grub and Tavor. I think Tavor. It seemed like she saw what was going on and just. I guess I can't hold her personally at fault because she has a lot of things going on.
A few things on
But
her plate, yeah.
yeah.
And it's to show the fallibility of humans, right? You can't expect too much. That each of us will do the best we can, and sometimes you can't save them all. And I guess that was kind of the bittersweet exploration there in the end of the book.
Hmm.
It's not all cheers and lollipops, is it?
That's very true.
Yeah.
I guess I guess that aspect probably would have worked more for me if there had been slightly more introspection on the part of other characters.
Sure, sure. No, I mean, I'm not gonna argue your point. At the
Mhm.
risk of a terrible pun, you can continue holding the torch for Sin.
Thank you, thank you.
He does.
I appreciate the pun.
As do I. Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of it is also if I take a different read on it, it's sometimes the people that are closest to you, you're actually the most harsh
Oh
with,
yeah, oh yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Especially when it comes to family.
Yeah.
And you kind of like it's easier to help a stranger than
Hmm.
it is somebody that you have baggage with.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely an extent to which the time that's devoted to her as a character is not proportional to the amount that I feel attached to her, and it's definitely the case that I feel a lot more attached to her than most of the fans. So I can't necessarily say this is a problem in the writing. It might just be a problem with me, or
I don't think it's necessarily a problem. It's just
yeah,
the way
in
that you
heavy
read
air
it.
quotes, yes,
Not a problem.
but yes.
But speaking of problems, no, I'm just
Wait,
kidding.
wait.
Yeah.
Oh, if we're to talk about personal characters that we are really attached to that we'd like to see again, uh, is the Ox coming back anytime?
Oh my goodness.
The ox from Toll the Hound?
Yeah.
I think that's just
Yes.
Krupp, right?
Who knows? Who
What?
knows what the ox is? Yeah,
Just saying the fans, and by fans I mean me, are waiting for more Ox.
right.
Sorry, go ahead, Panda.
No, it's okay. I was a little disappointed, not gonna lie, in that scene that Ash was talking about, where Sin like burns everything and then goes to the tower, the bridge burner ghost army was like going to ride in to help with the Jaghuts and
The
the
mask.
Talon Mass. Yeah. And I got so excited when it was like, yeah, Whiskey Jack showed up, right? And they're on their horses riding to it. And then I didn't get to see any of it. I
It's a
got
long
so
book,
excited.
right?
I
It's a
know.
long book. There's only so much I can do.
No, I know.
That thing was bursting at the seams by the time I was getting towards the end of that. It's a massive
Yeah,
play out of a whole series of events. And some things I just had to leave to the imagination of the reader.
I understand. But I was very excited.
Also, if you think of there's some pretty classic fantasy novels where the return of a ghost army is pretty central, and we see lots of it.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
So just imagine that, transpose it onto
Well, the
the.
scene that sticks in my mind is like Lord of the Rings,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
No.
So just transfer that over. You got it.
You could like add a footnote in
Yeah,
the book, like
yeah,
for description of this battle, see Return of the King.
yeah, yeah. With a few ibids thrown in. Yeah,
If that conceptual concert happens, that could be one of the scenes.
absolutely,
just
absolutely.
just fully taken from the Peter Jackson movie. I guess that leads into a question I have about how you approach certain types of catharsis in your writing these days, because at least in the latter half of the Book of the Fallen, it seems that you are much more happy to write about the build up and everything that happens before the conflict and the setting of the pieces, and for a lot of the actual, what a lot of fantasy books would focus on, the sizzle,
Hmm.
you're more reluctant to write that, and it can leave readers with a feeling of like something really cool is happening, something really cool is happening, something really cool is happening, and then it like the camera pulls away. So what's your mindset on that these days?
I'll write the scenes that I think are needed, but I almost sense these days that, well, I don't know, and I don't know if this is going to work or not. It's like when I wrote "The God is not willing," and the final scenes there. I don't know if you've read that. Have you read that?
I love The God Is Not Willing.
Okay. Well,
Especially at the end. The end's fantastic.
those final scenes, they're a lot bigger than what I could describe, right? So you jump from rock to rock, island to island of experience, and I guess I don't know. The writer has to decide, what's going to be in there, what's going to stay in there, and what isn't. What's the minimal you can do to actually convey that emotional impact that you want. And to me, a lot of the emotional impact is not this scene, not the event itself. It's the aftermath of the event. It's how characters within the story seek to process what they've just experienced. Because there are only so many variations that one can write with this kind of stuff, with your big battle scenes. It's kind of what the Marvel Comics universe is running into, the problem of the final battle. 10, 15 minutes of utter boredom because we've seen it all before.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it all before. All that
all,
fight. Yeah, we've
all
seen
the
everything.
quips, all the CGI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The characters flying into buildings, like blah blah blah. So yeah, I think there can be a kind of a jadedness that can hit an audience, or just weariness with the repetition. And I know as I continue to write, I know I've got a growing aversion to writing violence and writing big battle scenes, and that's something I'm going to have to sort of live with because I'm writing fantasy novels and there's going to be battles and there's going to be violence, but I do have a growing aversion towards it for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I relate to that on the reader side. I
Interesting.
my attitudes towards reading violence have become a lot more complicated than they were when I was a kid. Let's
Yeah,
say.
I think it's something is changing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's sometimes hard to go from okay, here's a series, or here is actually just a retelling of events in real life, showing the horror, the abject horror of what this is, and then back to a very sanitized popular fantasy version of what's going on.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that like I still enjoy like martial arts movies or like John Wick or whatever, and the dissonance there
Well,
is
yeah,
something that I'm trying to
they're
think about.
so over the top, they're so physically
Mhm.
impossible that you can suspend your disbelief, or you can actually revel in your disbelief, and that becomes part of the entertainment.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean they're great fun. They're great fun to watch because they're so ridiculous, and the choreography is breathtaking. It's
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so then you appreciate the editing, you appreciate the camera work, the acting, the stunts, some of those special effects. And so there's plenty there. There's plenty there.
Yeah.
And for any fight scenes, I'm more and more drawn to novelty, something just you haven't seen before. And it seems like, especially in fantasy or epic fantasy, it's just these big battles, like you said, like we have at the Marvel problem, they're just all the same. So when I read a battle and half the battle is two people playing a tabletop campaign and it's a metaphor for the battle, or so two people afterwards are looking at uh, an art piece of the battle and talking about it, like I'm gonna love that. So
Hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, man, I fought myself and over a long time over. You're referring to the battle at the end of
yes,
All of Light.
follow
Yeah.
play.
Yeah, because I did not want to write it. So I figured,
Um,
how can I convey this battle without actually having to, wade down into the
It,
field?
it's honestly one of my favorites. It's up there with the end of Cripple God for me.
Interesting.
that feeling for me is a certain scene where two characters are literally fighting the manifestation of another's trauma in an attempt
Yeah.
to save her. Big fan of that one. That was really
Ah,
good.
that one's good.
Interesting.
This is why I think I just don't, like flat out don't believe you when you say you're not the writer you used to be, because that you make me feel like you make me feel things, Steve.
Well, that's sort of that's the hope in the writer is to make the reader feel something.
You know
And
what is
so,
big in fantasy?
what's that?
Romance.
Yeah, I tend to go more more comedic in that respect. Maybe that says a lot about me. I don't know. Maybe it says too much about me. Who knows? But yeah, there was so much I needed to explore, and I guess I deliberately limited my palette to mix artistic metaphors here. But when it shows up, I tended to use it for purposes of levity, to lighten, because the rest of the stuff is so freaking heavy.
Yeah.
So, when it shows up, the intention is to be kind of just surprising, and you don't have to think too much about it. I guess one example would be in The Crippled God. Who is it? Is it Herb and
Oh my
Hellion?
Urban
God.
Hellion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they have that one moment, when one falls on top of the other, and
Yeah.
that was like that's all I needed for that one. I mean, that love was been there all that time, right? It's been touched
Yeah.
on over and over again, but its consummation was to me that was the perfect place for it.
I mean, if you ever want to explore it more in a short story, send the Malazan world, feel free to.
Right?
Yeah, try a romance novel. Next Bachlet and Cobra Brooch, maybe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've got something else in mind for that. Actually, oddly enough, I'd say this is giving too much away. The ninth novella, which is the final one for Vocal and Corporal Brooch. I have the eight and nine still to write, but I know what the stories are.
Mm.
And yeah, you could actually interpret the ninth one as a romance. Yeah,
Oh, very interesting. I got to get reading.
yeah, you'll see when I finally.
I would like to thank you for Anna Richt and Briss. Their love softens my soft heart.
Oh, good, cool. Yeah. But again, less is more. At least for me, when I'm writing that stuff, you know, uh, none of the panting lust, all that kind of stuff. I'll avoid.
None of the panting lust of Iskerl Pust.
Oh, I love the panting lust of what's her name, Dalhani's lady with the booty,
Oh, Masangalani.
Masangalani.
Oh God, yeah.
Yep. I have no comments for that.
No.
I do want to be mindful of your time. You've given us plenty. So to start to wrap up, we do have some listener questions and comments. one of them asked from Toromir, do you have a favorite character you wrote in the series? And was that a gamed character? If
No,
gamed, you
no,
can say no.
no, no. It's not a game character, but Tavor was by far my favorite character to write. Yeah.
You know, I was actually kind of surprised. I thought I would have more to say and like more to pick on about Tavor, but honestly, like I think the ending was very fitting. She made sense to me at the end, and I think she's just like she is who she is. But I
Yeah,
guess like
exactly. Yeah.
if you have any other comments you want to say about Tavor, feel free to
Well,
share.
she is the most constrained writing I've done in terms of holding back on a character and giving away as little as possible,
Hmm.
all leading up to those final certain moments in the Crippled God. And so for those things to be effective, and they're small. Again, they're small gestures. Well, one isn't, but I think there's a scene with Fiddler when she's pulled her helmet off and makes a comment on her hair.
Yeah,
So, if she'd been making that comment throughout the entire series, it would not have had the impact it had.
right,
Because that was a humanizing gesture. And everybody's been talking about her throughout the entire march of being inhuman,
right.
so distant, so remote, so cold that I wanted to sort of, I guess, pull the curtain a little bit aside, so you got to see something there. And that was foreshadowing her final moments of that inarticulate cry
Hmm.
that she makes is what the entire book was writing towards with this character. And so again, I needed to be as disciplined as possible and to give as little away as possible. She has another scene where she takes Mael's knife and uh,
Yeah.
draws blood from her hand. So there's a few of those, and she makes that comment. I think it's something along the lines of, haven't you bled me enough?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that's 13,000 pages leading up to like 3, 4 scenes.
Yeah.
And they were in my head from the freaking beginning. And so I remember just feeling this extraordinary, almost a sense of privilege whenever I got to a scene with Tavor,
Hmm.
because it allowed me to challenge my writing abilities to constrain as much as possible, but still convey just enough
Right.
to at least give the excuse or the potential of holding on to faith in Tavor with what little you've been given, and for the characters as well. And so that's why you have characters like Blistig and stuff who are unable to do that.
Hmm.
So that's the role that they take. Um, and there may be readers who were, on board with Blistig on that, unable to see or unwilling to sort of have that faith in this inscrutable character, because Tavor certainly stayed that all the way through until the end.
Yeah, the reveal with Blistic, what she tells him of why he's still alive,
Mm,
like that definitely did not see that coming. And I think the thing with Tavor is in the moment in reading it, it's not, at least for me, it wasn't as cathartic. It's the afterwards when everything is settling and you're thinking back through, your reading journey of like everything I could remember. I've forgotten a lot, but being able to think about all the way back in Dead House Gates, like her presence.
yeah, but you see, her lying to her brother when she recognizes him is the callback all the way back to the beginning of Dead House Gates.
Yeah.
This time through, I was really resonating with Tavor's journey. I've had some struggles with often pretty severe depression, so the hidden battle that she goes through, it really really spoke to me, especially those tiny scenes you wrote in the Crippled God at the end, like Lostara noticing that she wears perfume. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
Lostara,
Mm-hmm.
and just the how obvious it was what it was costing her to sit upright and ride her horse to the front of the column,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end when she just collapses, she finally can let down the burden.
Yeah.
And all through the series when she's just she hears something and she accepts a heavier weight.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
A small
Definitely.
scene that really stood out to me was when, after everything was going over and we were in the denouement, and Briss says that they will erect a statue in her honor, and she asks if it will be beautiful.
Yeah.
I thought that was just so humanizing and really beautiful.
Yeah, but again, it's as few scenes possible.
Mhm.
I think that's what gives it the impact.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
When I
because
finish, oh, go ahead.
well, I'm just gonna say there's always the risk of melodrama, and that's unearned emotion. And I want to make sure that all the emotions are earned.
They definitely were. When I finished The Crippled God, I felt nostalgic,
Hmm.
and it was definitely, it's so hard to describe that feeling. It's just like it's almost like you are leaving summer camp. Like you were with these
Mm.
people and it was a very intense experience and now it's over and
Yeah,
you have to say
but
goodbye.
I had to do the same thing, right? So that's why it backs out structurally the same way it came into the series, right? It begins it ends where the series begins with the weather vane
Right.
in Lost City. So it's structurally backing right out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we all needed to take that journey back out. Yeah.
Very well done. Okay. So some messages from our listeners are from Sun Gamer. Well, for one, thank you for writing these beautiful books and for inspiring me to be ambitious with my world building and storylines in my GMing for the last decade.
Cool.
Specifically, I'd like to know how much of the last 3 books was gamed. Everybody wants to know this.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. The the sequence with the Marines on the hilltop
Hmm,
was gamed.
okay.
Yeah.
Was Nefarious Bread in it?
I don't remember. I don't remember. Probably not. No, I think Nefarious Bread was conjured up in in a bar at a convention, and it was actual comment on the bread that was delivered to the table while we
Oh
were
my
waiting for
God.
dinner. So yeah, so that may have come later.
Lady S says, thank him, of course, for the books, but also the interaction he keeps up with the fandom. So appreciated, and one of the reasons I started Malazan. The fandom would love a Malazan art book with maps and all the good stuff.
Yeah, well, we've had talks with our French publisher when Cam and I toured in France last summer, 2 summers ago now, and so that's still sort of uh, brewing, I guess. It can take some time, but we do have something in mind. But it's all down to when the French publisher, is up for it, and of course, if they're sort of taking the lead on this thing, then obviously the original first version will be translated into French, and then it'll have to be picked up by a different publisher
Oh, wow.
elsewhere.
Okay. And then lastly, Gadim Bacha says, thank you for writing Fellison.
Ah, right. Yeah. People still talk about that, don't they? Yeah.
hmm I was having a conversation with a friend who is now reading the series for the first time, and he's on the anti-Fellison train right now. I'm gonna try
Mm.
and steer him towards the light, but who knows how successful I'll be.
Everybody does the best they can of all those characters,
Yeah.
right? Hyboric, Bowden, and Felicin. They're all trying to survive the best they can. Yeah.
As time goes on, my appreciation for those characters only goes up, I think, as it tends to do with most of the characters in the series. Although I do love to tease Huron over his Nemander love.
Nemander's the best.
Who's the best?
Nemander.
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 I love Nemander.
I like Nemander. Everybody hated Nemander. They hated that whole
Oh,
part
yeah.
of the Toll the Hounds.
Ash hates him.
I don't hate.
I think he's interesting.
I find a lot of him unconvincing. I want him to prove himself to me, and I don't feel like he has done that yet. But that's so it goes.
Poor Nemander having to live up to those expectations.
Right? Yeah.
Ash basically, Nemander is an Animander. I don't like him.
That's exactly my thought process. Actually, I really resent him for not being troll. I think is most of it.
Ah.
Most of it, yeah.
Very
No one can live up to Troll's legacy.
These are double standards.
No, by virtue of him having died. Yeah.
Yeah. Did I ask this? I don't remember if I asked this last. Erastus in many ways, God of Tragedy,
Mm.
really reminded me of an author. You know, like the aspect of an author that pushes his characters
Mhm.
towards the most tragic ends because it makes for a good story.
Mhm.
So, I guess to what extent was that character an exploration of that concept, if at all?
No, his primary function was set within the diegesis, within that world, for sure. Um, his internal thought processes are also derived mostly from his history, his personal history. So by this point he has been discarded,
Mhm.
and so it's this final play to sort of become relevant again. So that's all very closely tied into. It's consistent with his character and where he's
Mhm.
placed. I don't think I really thought in terms of anything meta with respect to him.
Okay.
I don't have any questions other than maybe a writing update on Walk in Shadow.
You know what I've had to do. No Life Forsaken is the second Witness one. It was two novels, and so I'm basically I'm having to restructure it so that it becomes seamless as one novel again.
Mhm.
So this was not something I sort of was anticipating having to do, but the two storylines were deviating to such an extent that it was hard to pull them across each other in the present structure. So now I'm sewing the two together in a more traditional fashion, and so I'm hoping by the end of this year to have the draft delivered. At which point,
And that's No Life Forsaken.
yeah, I'll spend maybe 10 days, 14 days on the ninth or the eighth Vocal and Cobra Brooch. And then I've got a lot of Walk in Shadow already written. So I'll be able to sort of hit the ground running when I get there.
Nice. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all the chats that you've given us. And I think, honestly, the next one that I want to read is Orb Scepter Throne,
Cool.
because apparently
Cool.
there's a lot of things that happen that I will really enjoy.
Wait till you get to a sale. Yeah.
I really like to sail.
Yeah. So did I.
Blood and Bone is my favorite of his.
Yeah.
But I thought a sail was the perfect way to wrap up that particular
Isn't it?
story.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, when he first told me that, I think we were sitting in Florida at a conference at the pool bar. And I'm not going to give him too much away, but when he told me of where and what the Crimson Guard end up as, is just blew me away. It was like, that was,
Wow.
Makes perfect sense.
it makes perfect sense. Blew me away. Yeah. Yeah. So have fun.
Thank you. Can't wait.
As someone does that, he's good at that.
He's really good.
He's devious. He's very devious. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed. And we will be doing a series wrap up discussion, just kind of regrouping our thoughts and kind of reflecting on our journey across the 10 books and looking forward to what's next. So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Ash, Kieran. Until next time. Bye.
Thanks for taking the journey.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a journey to
Yeah.
take.
Gonna be taking it more times in the future.
Cool.